The lesson that I'm taking into 2025 is I'm able to accomplish my dreams without taking for granted or at the expense of my health and well-being.
Welcome back to Nevada Realtors Today, your place for timely updates on the news and trends that matter to realtors in the Silver State. Now let's join your Nevada Realtors President, Brandon Roberts, and Nevada Realtors CEO, Tiffany Banks, for today's episode of Nevada Realtors Today.
We're joined today by the amazing Crystal, a mom, wife, and realtor and certified life coach. And you were telling us a little bit before we started recording that you've just recently moved into this role as a licensee after being a transaction coordinator for some time. Can you tell us what really inspired you to make that move?
Yeah, I have loved real estate for so many years, and working as a TC obviously allowed me to really get a handle on what the transaction looks like from behind the scenes and what it takes to make sure the disclosures are completed properly and time frames and deadlines are met. And for this particular season of my life with my family, the age of my son, and just with the other experiences that I've had as a businesswoman, I really felt that now was the time for me to step forward as a licensee and just get out there and help people buy and sell in this beautiful city that we live in.
That's awesome. And so did it take some thinking about making the move? Because obviously you're in a position that you feel very comfortable in, you know very well, right? And then he's making this move of essentially you're an entrepreneur. You have to figure out how to get your clients, how to make your clients happy. Was it a decision that was easy for you to make? You felt ready, or did you have to think it?
It was an easy decision. And the reason why it was easy for me is because I'm not new to entrepreneurship. So I didn't come into real estate with any delusions about that once I got my license, I'd have buyers and sellers knocking on my front door. And, it would just be so simple to get things going. I knew, right, that it would take hard work. And I just am in a position and, like I said, season in my life where I'm up for it, like I'm excited about it. And I also am very intentional about how I plan to go about achieving my goals this year, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about today, doing business without burnout. But this was just right for me. And I'm really excited to be here and just talk with you both about how we can all accomplish our real estate dreams without burning out.
Awesome. Brandon?
So I'm excited you're here, Crystal. It's very nice to meet you. You've been on our schedule for a little bit to do the podcast, so we're excited to have you. And part of it is because not only are you a realtor, I guess you're a certified life coach as well.
Correct.
I mean, how did you get into that?
Yeah, so that is what I did after I closed down my transaction coordinator business. So I just wanted to tap into this other calling that I felt was on my life. And I went through a 6-month certification program and really learned the power of mindset and the power of really understanding your thoughts and how your thoughts create your reality. And that really was life-changing. And during that time as a life coach, I coach clients on how to, not burn out. I coach couples on how to communicate better in their relationships, and all of those skills really that I developed over those years where I was coaching, they really, I feel, have set me up so well to use those skills in real estate, right? Because we know that real estate should be about numbers, but it's not. It's about emotions, right? Until we start working with robots, real estate is so emotional, and understandably. And so I'm just really thankful that I have that in the back of my head when I'm working with clients and when I'm taking care of myself as a realtor going after my goals.
It's interesting when you speak about communication, and something that Brandon and I have actually talked a lot about this year is communication with clarity. Like a lot of times there's miscommunications, misunderstandings because they're not clear on
Yes.
either what the message is. Obviously, we know a lot gets lost in texts, right? Or email.
Yes.
People interpret it the wrong way, but oftentimes they just don't have all of the information to make informed decisions. And so when you mention communication, what do you
Mhm.
think is like another key element of effective communication?
Yeah, I think many times we are communicating with while trying to also manage the other person's reaction or the outcome or control the other side. And so I totally believe, right, that clear communication is kind communication. And so I think sometimes there may be, instead of just getting straight to the point, maybe in business or being very, you know, kind but direct, I think that leaves opportunity for us to have miscommunication. And then when we're dealing with other agents or even as realtors in our personal lives, when we're communicating with family members or what have you, I really believe that sometimes we don't communicate actually more so than often, right? What our actual needs may be or something that we want in a relationship because we're afraid of the other person's response or their inability to follow through on whatever it is that we think that we need. And so what I really believe is allowing others to have the dignity of their own process, right? If I'm trying to communicate something to my husband about a goal that I have right in my real estate business, he may or may not be as thrilled about it as I am, right? And that doesn't have to be a problem because the goals and desires that have been placed on my heart aren't necessarily placed on his in the same way and the same maybe amount of passion or excitement. And so I think keeping that in the back of your mind, no matter who you're communicating with, can be really helpful.
I love that.
Sounds like the course you went through to become a life coach is probably something that every agent or realtor should go through getting into the business. I think it puts you in a lot of perspective. But let me ask you, what's the difference between like a life coach and a business coach?
Yeah, I think what I have seen with some of the colleagues that I still have today in that industry is that they're one and the same, that many life coaches are business coaches who have just decided to niche down in business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because you also think about, even when we've discussed the Leadership Academy in the past, is like you come in for example, our Leadership Academy that we do as a state organization, you come in not knowing what to expect, and it's all about personal and professional growth. But what we found is the more aligned you are to your personal goals, aspirations, dreams, and feeling like that's more balanced and you're able to be more successful in business. And so they all almost do go hand in hand in a way. But yeah, you think about, I've in my past searched out, business coach, because then I'm like, that's the person that's going to get me dialed in on my processes, making sure it's structured. And then life is like making sure that I'm fulfilling my potential, whatever that is.
Yeah.
A lot of why I ask that is because everything crosses over, right? And like if you don't have a balance in your life, that's going to affect your business and stuff like that. So it was always curious to me how people kind of categorize the type of coaching they're doing. I guess maybe it's how they lead with it, but I think you'd have to whatever business or life coach be able to coach in both areas.
I agree, right? Because if you are looking for a business coach and they don't have some of those maybe life coaching skills and they're all strategy, that's something to be aware of. Of course, we need strategy, but if we're going about strategy with a messy mindset and not really paying attention to our mental hygiene, we can have all the strategies in the world, right, laid right out in front of us, and it's not going to work. Yeah.
So as a wife, a mom, a realtor, a life coach in your past world, how do you balance all of these roles and what really drives you?
Yeah, what I have learned a lot from my previous experience in business is how to go about goals in a way that is sustainable. Because I have experienced burnout before, right? Even before I was an entrepreneur. when I had a 9 to 5 job, I had moments of burnout, and then same thing as a businesswoman. And so what I'm really passionate about, with when I have my burnout, conversation hat on, is knowing how to cultivate goals appropriately. Because I think so many times we may set a goal about what we want to accomplish in our real estate career, for example. Like, I have big goals for this year, like I know many of the listeners do, but we may go into that goal setting with the same mindset that we had a month ago, right? And many times we learn that we may run into a brick wall because we haven't made time to really understand, like, what's the mindset that got us our current results? What do we want to keep? What do we want to get rid of? And what do we want to believe moving forward? And many times it's so empowering to think about what we believe. That invokes the feelings. And all of our actions are based on feelings. And then remembering the cost or the sacrifice of the goal, right? So if I want to, to make sure that I'm wearing all my hats, like you were saying, Tiffany, if I want to wear them well, for me personally, I recently started meditating. And when I am setting a goal, I've told myself that I have to ask myself, who can help me with this goal? Not necessarily how can I achieve this goal? Meditating in the morning with the family, I need everybody's buy-in. Like, okay, mommy's going to be in the room for this amount of time. Don't come in the door, right? And I think those little things they seem small, but I think communicating your goals and getting buy-in from your family when it comes to professional or personal goals can be really, really helpful in helping you actually achieve them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You think I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and you don't know how much they buy into what you're doing, all the things. And
yes,
it's been said a couple of nights ago, you have to have a conversation with Beckett. Like, he's concerned over something you're working on towards right now, that it's going to take you away from him more.
Oh, wow.
More than you already have been. And I said, I've actually been home a lot. Like, this past month, I've only been gone one night compared to some months is every week. And Garen's like, you talk to him about it. And so we're going to have a little date night this week and just talk through. And I think that at the ages that my kids are at, and I'm not sure of your children's ages, but it's like they kind of want to be a part of the decision making in what are you working on, Mom? And they want to support you, right? But they also they're supported. Are you going to be at my scrimmage tonight at 7?
That's right.
I'm going to be now because you put it that way. But they want to have the conversation and feel that they're a part of whatever you're working on, the same way that you're a part of what they're working on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think to your point, when we kind of have their buy-in or we have their collaboration, it makes it, it makes it fun, because then, like you were saying, you're going to have a little date night with him and just have that one-on-one time, which is really, special. When I shared that with my husband and my son, that I wanted to have meditation time, that got the conversation going with my son, who's only 7, like, what's meditation? What is that? And so, yeah, I agree.
And they do have good ideas.
They do.
If you need some ideas, spend some time with a 6 and 8-year-old. They'll have a lot of good ideas. Brandon took his son to work with him, and now his son, his incredible son, who we all love so much, Tyson, now works with him. But you never push that, right, Brandon? You're just like exposed him to my life.
Yeah, no, and I'm much past where you guys are with the age of my child. My child just turned 29 today, actually.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, he was really little, I'd take him on all the showings and everything else like that. And I'd ask him when he was little if he wanted to get in real estate, and he said no. So I really thought he would never do it, but he did. And I'll just tell you, it's a blessing to me to be able to work with him on a regular basis. But, Tiffany's amazing at balancing her work life, home life, that type of stuff. I mean, as you're getting into real estate, and that real estate can be a pretty demanding job if you let it. It can monopolize your time if you let it. I mean, have you given thought to how you're going to create that balance?
I have, so for example, I just did an open house this past weekend, and I was mindful of the time to where I could finish the open house, go pick up the signs, and still get to soccer game right before it started. So little things like that, I think that is the benefit of us having some control over our time in this industry. And so, I think in even having the conversation with my son around, I know how important soccer is to you, and, mommy plans to be at every game as much as possible, but there may be times where I may miss or I may be a little late. And I think communicating that ahead of time, no matter the ages of your child, can really be helpful in setting expectations. And because I think disappointment comes from unmet, unspoken expectations within ourselves and with others. And so I think even having that realistic conversation with myself, as I get busier, will there be 2 weeks in a row where I may be battling going out with buyers versus getting to the game on time? And I understand that that's a real conversation that I'll need to have with myself. And so kind of like how I was mentioning with Tiffany earlier, that I'm going into it eyes wide open, right? So there's no delusion, I think, around what may be asked of me, and I'll have the opportunity to rise to the occasion, and keeping in mind, right, how the people that are important to me as I go about growing this business.
And you mentioned burnout, and that's something that's really important to you. Tell us a little bit. You also mentioned burnout having to do with goals. So hearing number one, what does burnout mean? We know what it feels like, right? But how do you know if you're approaching it so you can stop yourself? And number two, how does that work into goals, whether they're long or short-term goals?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. My definition of burnout is going after a goal at the expense of your mental, physical, spiritual, right, emotional well-being. And I really think it's kind of as simple as that. And because I think anyone listening right now can probably in a moment go back to a moment in their lives when they felt burnout. And so I actually believe that many of us weren't set up to know how to set goals in a way where we don't run into burnout. And so I have this 7-point plan that I put myself through. And when I went into real estate, I told myself, I have put this plan into work and I know that it works. And so I just have to work the plan. And I'll just kind of go through them briefly, and then we can talk more about them. So the first thing is, I mentioned this earlier actually, is understanding the mindset that got you the current results. I'll never forget telling a coach that I had about a goal that I wanted that I hadn't achieved yet. And I told her that I had full belief in that goal. And she told me, well, no, you don't, or you'd be living it already. And I was like, oh, that was an ego check. And so, I think when you go about cultivating your goals, don't do it where you're judging yourself or being hard on yourself. We just want to understand ourselves better, so that way we can really take care of ourselves as we are achieving the goal. So then ask yourself, what do I want to believe, right? How many transactions do you want to close this month? How many families do you want to work with this month? Or the volume, however you want to say that goal. And then asking yourself, how does that make you feel? Does it make you feel nervous, excited? Does it feel bold? Does it feel invigorating? Does it feel scary, right? And ask yourself why. And then again, remembering the cost of that goal. And I think when I think of it that way, no one had ever told me that a goal would cost, right? And sometimes the cost is just waking up an hour earlier in the morning because you need quiet time, or you need to go to the gym, or get up and make yourself a healthy breakfast so that way you can start the day in a successful way. But what is the cost? And then understanding the possible objections, right? And sometimes the objections may not even come from others. Maybe they're self-objections. It's our brain, right? Because our primal brain wants pleasure and comfort, right? And when we're going after a goal, many times that's putting us out of our comfort zone, and that primal brain wants to pull us back. And so the last two items are creating a strategic plan, which involves evaluation, right? So if I say, well, I'm posting on social media every single day and I'm not getting any clients, that's one thing versus I posted on social using this one strategy for 30 days and I didn't get a client. Let me go back and evaluate. Let me go back and see, maybe did videos have a different response versus text or sharing an article. But going about a plan strategically and where you're actually evaluating it and then just working that plan that you create. So that's kind of like my process of setting up a goal. So that way I have an actual chance of achieving it while taking care of myself in the meantime.
That sounds like a lot of work into setting one goal, but I love it because it's very thoughtful.
It is.
A lot of steps into the check-in, and and we admire you for even reaching out to us to say, I'd love to get you the conversation. I've been listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
That's bold. I really appreciate that type. We don't know if being on our podcast was on your list of goals, but
it was.
the fact of you having, and you always, I think in life, we're sometimes scared to put ourselves out there. We're fearful of rejection. We're fearful of not being good enough or even taking on something that we can't handle. But you also see in life, unless you ask, unless you are out there, saying, I'm available to work with these clients, like I'm available to represent you the best way I possibly can. People just don't know, right?
Yes.
So being more intentional from what you're saying and having those goals and those kind of check-ins, I can see how that could be successful. I need to make sure that I listen to this podcast again and write all of the steps down because I was just trying to listen, but there's a lot of good nuggets in there. Brandon, I can see you're smiling over there.
Well, I always go back and listen because there's always things. And I remember early on when we started doing these, I was taking notes. And then I thought, well, I'm not even paying attention. I'm not ready to. So now I just know we're recording it. We're going to be able to go back to it. So there's a great value. But, when you bring up fear, fear holds a lot of people back, right? Yeah. And so like a question would be like in your life coach training and stuff like that. And as you're coaching people, I mean, how do you coach them through overcoming fear?
Yeah. I actually coach them to work with the fear, right? Because what I have learned is that what we resist persists. You probably have heard of that, right? And so many times when we are dealing in this particular industry with real estate, if we're dealing with issues around visibility, doubt and fear, right? That's going to hold us back because this is a very visible industry. Like Tiffany was just saying, we have to put ourselves out there. So when we are dealing with negative emotions, and Brandon, I'm glad you brought up fear, right? Because that's a big one. Fear of rejection, fear of if this won't work, or I'm going to get a no, or I'm going to get the door slammed in my face, or I put the open house sign, with the arrow facing the wrong way, like all those things, right? That maybe some of us are, dealing with. I think we have to remember that work with the emotion and acknowledge the emotion and don't try to resist it. And so what that can look like in a practical way, I encourage everyone to figure out like a process for processing. So a process to process some of the negative emotions that you're having that's unique to you. So for me, it's journaling, and for me, it's walking. So I may go on a walk and just asking myself, like, what am I feeling? Where are those feelings coming from? Okay, because I just had an interaction with someone that didn't go the way that I thought it would, for example. And so I think if we can kind of get in the habit of knowing that it's not bad for us to experience negative emotions, that it's actually normal for us to have negative emotions, we'll stop fighting them so much and actually work with them. Because sometimes you have to like take the next step with doubt, right beside you, or with fear right beside you. It doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get rid of it, right? But learning how to work with it.
I think about a lot of newer agents, Brandon, and you would know better than both of us, is when they are sometimes they want to come in and show up that they are here to be successful. They obviously want to make their broker proud. But how do you communicate with agents, especially the newer ones, on don't be afraid to come ask the brokers? Like, you have managing brokers, you have these people in place for a reason to help support. And how do you have them get over the fact of being afraid to ask the questions?
So I think you do have a fair amount of people that are afraid to ask the questions, but I think a lot of people hide behind the questions or asking the questions so they don't actually have to go out and do the work. And so I think the initial thing is, and in trainings and stuff, it's more like we've got to get you to be able to get business before you even understand how to deal with it. Because if you understand all the aspects of the contract and everything else, but you never have a client, it never gets you anywhere. And so, like, for us to overcome fear, it's through action, knowledge and action. So the more they know, and then by actually applying it or doing it, they'll overcome that fear that way. So it's just basically letting them know that you are there for them through that process and you do it with them, and then they're more likely to overcome it. But what I find is if they always just ask questions, they'll never get better because they'll always rely on someone else to kind of answer. So you got to get them to kind of think through the process too. But fear is a real thing. I mean, there's the fear of rejection, obviously, which is probably number one, but there's also fear of success. I've come across a lot of people that just don't feel like they deserve it. Or sometimes, and this could be my problem sometimes too, is I know if I get on the phones, I'm going to be busy and have to work harder. So, I don't know, but it's a challenging thing. And I like real estate a lot. And it's exciting that you're coming into this side of it because it is a self-motivating and very disciplined business. And it sounds like you've got those tools coming in. So I'm anticipating you're going to have huge success, and you've put a lot of thought into it.
I received that, Brandon. Thank you.
Yeah. One question I have, though, is it sounds like you think a lot, like you have, like you process a lot of things in your head. I'm kind of the opposite of that. Like, I don't really analyze things that way. Is that something you've always done, or is that just something you've kind of developed?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So no, I haven't always been that way. It's something that I have developed. And to Tiffany's credit, when you were saying like that process sounds like a lot, it is, right? But what I have learned is to slow down, to speed up, because I tend to be like, go, like just take this action, just take this, make this phone call, do this, go to that workshop, talk to this, and what I have learned, if I just slow down, right, to actually put together a plan that I know that I can commit myself to, that I like those results so much more. And I think what happens, and I think probably both of you can attest to this in your own lives, is when you get a taste of a system or a process or a way of living or a way of being that works really well, you can't help but to repeat it. And so that's what I have found with that process, that 7-step process, that does take a little bit of time, but it really has served me so well. But no, I definitely wasn't always like that, for sure.
I definitely need to remember the slow down to speed up, because that's the piece that I'm constantly moving at. But then you find good partners, like Brandon's a perfect example. He moves at a little bit of a slower pace. So that really helps me, catch my breath, have a conversation. And when I get off the phone with him, I'm always like, okay, I can kind of ease into something rather than trying to do the 50 million things at one time. And so I think that that's great. That's a great lesson and reminder for those of us that, sometimes doing everything quickly is not the right way. It's actually, again, kind of how at the beginning we talked about being intentional about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I could see that importance. So are you also doing the life coaching if our listeners want to reach out to you regarding that?
So I am holding workshops on burnout coaching because I love the topic so much. And it's such a connection to real estate, right? Because, we have statistics in our industry of burnout, high divorce rates, stuff like that, right? And so I do hold those workshops. And so, yeah, if anyone's interested, they can connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll get them signed up for the next one.
Awesome. And then do you hold a workshop once a month, or can somebody kind of put a team together, a group together?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do them virtually on Zoom monthly. But yeah, if someone is interested in me coming to their office, I would love to. I really do. I really love helping people like set themselves up for success. And what's amazing about that plan, that 7-point plan, right, that we went over, is it can be personalized, and it needs to be personalized, because I know I have had experiences where I've looked to my mentors and I've tried to duplicate them. And it didn't always work out so well, right? Because many times I was looking at like my chapter 1 compared to their chapter 20 and their chapter 20 resources and time. And it just wasn't right? It didn't match. And so I think with that in mind, I'm really intentional about helping people create plans that are personal to them and the season of life that they're in. So that way the plan can actually work. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's exciting. Brandon, do you have a final question for her?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I would just really say I really appreciate your time. Enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better.
Thank you.
Actually, maybe one last question. I mean, if you could go back on your younger self, what would you tell them?
Ooh, I think enjoy the journey. I've been heavily. I have sometimes been outcome obsessed, and in doing so, you miss so many like amazing byproducts and little blessings and little moments along the way, right? Because you're so focused on something ending up a certain way on a certain date and a certain time. And so I would say, enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey, like have a strong goal, go at it, right? Go out there, put yourself out there, but take time to smell the roses, take time for the people in your life, and enjoy the ride.
That's amazing because, as I've gotten older, that's probably one thing I would have told my younger self too, is don't be in a hurry to wish your life away, so to speak. Really slow down and enjoy it, because as you get older, you realize how the most valuable commodity you have is time. So
yes. Yep. Amen.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to following your journey.
Thank you both.